So picture this. A man in his 50s is found dead in his car.
Okay.
He's angled down into a roadside ditch about 60 miles from his home. And at first glance, it looks like just a tragic accident.
Right, a standard car crash.
Exactly. But the autopsy reveals that the physical trauma from the crash just wasn't nearly severe enough to kill him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There is some alcohol in his system, but a standard toxicology screen for, common drugs and poisons comes back completely clean.
So they have no idea what happened.
None. The case goes cold. For 5 entire years, it just sits in a file.
5 years? That's a long time in forensics.
It is. But then his wife walks into a police station and actually confesses to a murder plot so calculated it honestly sounds like a movie script.
Oh my God.
Right. She tells them she harvested the leaves and roots of this tall, beautiful purple flower growing in a garden, boiled them down into this really potent dark broth. Then she crushed up a few prescription insomnia pills and mixed the entire concoction into a bottle of red wine served at dinner.
That is terrifyingly deliberate.
Totally.
Yeah.
Within hours, her husband was dead. She drove his body out to the ditch, staged the crash, and just walked away.
Which, I mean, that would have been the end of the story, right? If it hadn't been for the sheer resilience of the botanical compound she used.
Exactly.
Because of her confession, forensic toxicologists were actually able to go back to the victim's preserved tissue samples.
Right, the stuff sitting in storage.
Yeah, the urine, liver, kidney tissues that had literally been sitting in a freezer for half a decade. And using advanced liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry, they went hunting for a very specific, highly complex molecular footprint.
And they actually found it.
They did. 5 years later, the chemical signature of a toxin known as aconitine was still sitting right there in his tissues. It was a microscopic smoking gun tying his death directly to that purple flower.
And that flower was monkshood.
Yep.
And that true story, I mean, it completely shatters this cozy pastoral illusion we have about the natural world, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
We tend to view plants as this passive green backdrop to our lives. Like, we hike through them, we weed them out of our gardens, we chop them up for salad.
Right, they're just scenery.
Yeah. But welcome to our deep dive into the most deceptive, hallucinogenic, and lethal herbaceous species on the planet. For you, the listener, we are charting a path through a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
It really is.
Because you could be holding 2 green leaves that look, completely identical to the untrained eye. One is a wild carrot you can toss in a stew, and the other shuts down your respiratory system while you remain fully conscious.
It's a terrifying coin toss if you don't know what you're doing.
It really is. So today, we are tearing into clinical phytotoxicology reports, botanical forensics case studies, and practical foraging guides. Our mission is to give you a shortcut to being a well-informed botanical detective.
Which is an essential skill.
Truly. We're unpacking the chemical warfare happening right under our noses. But I have to ask, we always hear about poisonous plants, but just how narrow is the line between a salad and a trip to the ER? I mean, the plant kingdom feels like a high-stakes game of poker where harmless plants are bluffing and the deadly ones are holding all the cards.
That's a great analogy. And to really grasp the sheer violence of these toxins, we have to look at the evolutionary pressure cooker that actually created them.
Okay, lay it on me.
It all boils down to a fundamental biological disadvantage, which is, well, a lack of mobility.
Right, they can't run away.
Exactly. When an animal is threatened, it relies on a fight-or-flight nervous system. A deer can sprint away from a wolf, a snake can strike back, even a tiny insect can just fly off a leaf.
Yeah, but a plant is literally rooted to the ground.
Right. They are anchored to the soil. They are sitting ducks for any grazing herbivore, fungal infection, or boring insect that comes along. So rather than developing legs or claws, they became brilliant, merciless chemists.
They went the chemical warfare route.
They really did. Over millions of years, they synthesized these complex secondary metabolites. And these are the phytotoxins.
So it's like an invisible arms race out there.
Oh, 100%. If a caterpillar evolves a resistance to a mild plant toxin, the plant that survives and reproduces is the one that randomly mutated a slightly more deadly chemical.
So over millennia, the bugs get tougher and the plants get vastly more lethal.
Exactly. They are manufacturing everything from complex alkaloids that disrupt electrical signals in the brain to toxalbumins that literally dismantle the protein-building machinery inside a cell.
That's insane. And I guess their original target might have been like a tiny aphid or a grazing rabbit.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the molecular structures they developed just happen to fit perfectly and catastrophically into the receptors of the human nervous system.
So it's kind of just bad luck for us.
It is entirely a chemical coincidence that a compound designed to give a beetle a stomachache happens to completely paralyze a human diaphragm. But that coincidence is what makes foraging such a razor's edge. The visual difference between a harmless plant and a lethal one is often just a matter of fine hairs on a stem or the angle of a leaf vein.
Which brings us to our first major group, right? The Apiaceae family, or the umbellifers.
Yes, the deadly doppelgangers.
This is the family that gives us edible carrots, celery, parsley, and parsnips, like grocery store staples.
These very common foods.
But sitting right alongside those is poison hemlock, Conium maculatum.
Right.
This is the plant famously used to execute the Greek philosopher Socrates in 399 BC.
A very famous execution.
Yeah, he was condemned for corrupting the youth of Athens, and his death sentence was literally a cup of hemlock tea. And reading the historical accounts of his execution is just chilling because the death is so mechanical.
It really is. It's not a gentle fading to black.
No, the toxin acts like a creeping wave of ice.
So the primary active agent in poison hemlock is a piperidine alkaloid called conine. And conine specifically targets the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the human body.
Wait, nicotinic, like nicotine.
Similar receptor, yes. These receptors are essentially the ignition switches for your muscles. Normally, your nervous system releases acetylcholine, which binds to the receptor, opens a channel, and tells the muscle to contract.
Okay, so it's the messenger.
Exactly. But conine acts first as a stimulant, forcing the muscles to twitch and fire, but then it rapidly becomes a formidable antagonist. It physically plugs the receptor site.
So it jams the lock.
Yes.
Yeah.
The brain is sending the signal to move, but the signal just can't connect. The ignition switch is completely jammed.
The medical term from our sources is an ascending paralysis, right?
Correct.
Because Socrates' disciples documented that he drank the tea, walked around until his legs felt heavy, and then he lay down. And the executioner actually pinched his foot, and Socrates couldn't feel it.
Right. The numbness starts low.
Yeah, the paralysis started in his toes and just crept upward. It took his legs, then his torso, then his arms, and eventually it reached the intercostal muscles of his ribs and his diaphragm.
He slowly lost the mechanical ability to pull air into his lungs.
He suffocated.
And the truly horrific aspect of conine toxicity is that the molecule does not readily cross the blood-brain barrier in a way that impairs cognitive function.
Oh man, so he knew exactly what was happening.
He did. The victim's mind remains entirely clear. You are fully conscious, fully alert, trapped inside a rapidly paralyzing body, entirely aware that you are about to stop breathing.
That is nightmare fuel. And this plant grows literally everywhere. It thrives in damp soils, roadside ditches, and field margins across North America and Europe.
It's extremely common.
And the worst part is it looks almost exactly like wild carrot, which foragers call Queen Anne's lace. People go out looking for a free natural carrot, and they end up harvesting a neurotoxin.
Which is why the botanical forensics required to tell them apart are the only things standing between a pleasant forage and an ICU ventilator.
So how do you tell them apart?
The stem is the crucial diagnostic canvas here. If you look at the stem of a wild carrot, it is uniformly pale green and covered in fine, fuzzy hairs. It has a rough texture.
Okay, green and fuzzy.
But poison hemlock, conversely, has a stem that is completely smooth and hairless. It is hollow inside, and most importantly, the lower half of the stem is heavily splotched with reddish-purple spots.
Oh, like bruises.
Yes. In fact, the Latin species name, maculatum, literally translates to spotted or blemished.
So green and fuzzy is a carrot, smooth with purple spots is a suffocating death.
Exactly. But there is also an olfactory warning.
Right, the smell.
Crushing the leaves of a wild carrot releases a pleasant, recognizable carrot smell. But crushing the leaves of poison hemlock releases a deeply foul, musty odor. Botanical guides frequently describe it as smelling like stale mouse urine.
Well, that is a highly distinct chemical warning.
It is. Yet, astonishingly, poison hemlock is not the most violently dangerous member of this family.
Wait, really? What's worse than suffocating while fully conscious?
That title belongs to water hemlock, species in the cicuta genus, like Cicuta maculata.
Yeah.
Because while poison hemlock causes a slow, descending silence in the body, water hemlock induces utter neurological chaos. It is widely recognized as the most violently toxic plant in North America.
And the chemical weapon here is different, right? It's a digoxin.
Yes, cicutoxin bypasses the muscles entirely and goes straight for the brain's control center. It targets the GABA receptors.
Okay, let me jump in here. Think of GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, as the primary brake pedal for your central nervous system.
That's exactly what it is.
Your brain is constantly firing electrical signals, and GABA is the traffic cop that keeps those signals regulated, slowing things down so you don't just overload.
And cyclotoxin is a non-competitive antagonist at these GABA receptors.
Meaning what, exactly?
Non-competitive means it doesn't just block the receptor temporarily. It actually binds to a different part of the receptor complex and fundamentally alters its shape.
So it breaks the pedal.
It renders the brake pedal completely useless. Without that inhibition, the brain experiences an unchecked massive storm of neuronal firing. Within 15 to 60 minutes of ingesting even a small amount of the root, the victim is thrown into catastrophic grand mal seizures.
Oh my God.
We're talking violent, prolonged convulsions, excessive salivation, and rapid cardiovascular collapse.
And this thing grows in wet seepage areas, marshes, along stream banks. Identifying it requires a level of microscopic observation that just feels almost unfair to a casual hiker.
It really does.
Because differentiating water hemlock from safe, edible lookalikes involves looking closely at the venation on the leaves.
Yes, the veins.
On a typical leaf, the tiny veins branch out from the center and run all the way to the very tips of the jagged edges in the teeth of the leaf.
Right.
But on water hemlock, those veins terminate in the notches between the teeth.
It is an incredibly subtle morphological difference. It's driven by the unique vascular structure of the plant.
I mean, I have to push back here. Okay, let's unpack this. You're telling me that noticing whether a leaf vein ends at the tip of a leaf or the notch of a leaf is the only thing standing between a nice forage and violent seizures.
Pretty much.
How did early humans ever survive this trial and error? I mean, you're starving. You pull up a root. Oh, wait, our sources mentioned the root too, right?
Yes. If you were to dig the plant up, the thick tuberous rootstock provides another clue, although a highly dangerous one.
Right.
The root contains horizontal chambers. If sliced open, these chambers ooze a thick, straw-colored, oily liquid. That liquid is highly concentrated cyclotoxin.
And deceptively, it smells almost exactly like fresh parsnips.
It does.
It's an impossibly high bar for survival. The trial and error that our ancestors went through to map out these safe foods must have carried an astronomical death toll.
It absolutely did, which is why ethnobotanical knowledge was guarded so closely and passed down orally with such reverence.
Makes total sense.
And the Epiaceae family has one more grim historical trick up its sleeve.
Oh, right, hemlock water dropwort.
Native to parts of Europe, yes. It contains a similar neurotoxin called enanthitoxin, and this plant is sometimes colloquially called dead man's fingers because of the shape of its tuberous roots.
Which is fitting, because the physical aftermath of this specific poisoning is deeply unsettling. As the neurotoxins trigger massive muscle spasms across the body, they specifically contract the muscles of the face.
The zygomaticus major muscles.
Right, the ones that run from the cheekbones to the corners of the mouth. The intense post-mortem tetany pulls the victim's lips back, freezing their face into a rigid, haunting smile.
Yes. Anthropologists and etymologists actually believe this botanical phenomenon is the origin of the term sardonic grin.
Wait, really? From a plant?
Yeah. Historical texts suggest that in ancient Sardinia, a prehistoric civilization used a potion made from this very plant for the ritualistic execution of criminals and elderly individuals who could no longer contribute to the society.
That is so dark.
The poison would induce a forced, terrifying smile just as the victim succumbed to the seizures.
A plant so incredibly lethal that its chemical signature literally invented a phrase for a sinister smile.
It's fascinating.
It perfectly illustrates how intertwined human culture is with botanical warfare. But let's shift gears entirely, because the hemlocks kill you by masquerading as your vegetables, shutting down your lungs, or overloading your synapses. But there is another family of plants, the Solenaceae family, that employs a completely different, deeply psychological strategy.
Whoa, the nightshades.
Yes. They don't just stop your body, they hack your perception of reality.
The Solanaceae family is a profound botanical paradox. On one hand, it provides a massive portion of the global caloric intake.
Right. Potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, bell peppers, chili peppers, they're all nightshades.
Exactly. But sitting on the darker branches of this family tree are species loaded with tropane alkaloids, some of the most potent, mind-altering, and lethal compounds found in nature.
And the crown jewel of this dark branch is Atropa belladonna, the deadly nightshade.
Yes.
The etymology alone is just heavy with warning. The genus name Atropa derives directly from Greek mythology. The Moirai, the three fates, controlled the destiny of every mortal. Clotho spun the thread of life. Lachesis measured how long it would be, and Atropos, the eldest and most feared, was the one who held the shears and cut the thread, determining the exact moment of death.
Naming a plant after the Greek Grim Reaper sets a certain expectation.
It really does. And the species name, belladonna, translates from Italian as beautiful woman.
Which points to a fascinating, highly dangerous cosmetic practice during the Italian Renaissance.
Oh, the eye drops.
Yes. Court women in Venice discovered that if they created a highly diluted, watery extract from the plant and dropped it directly into their eyes, the local reaction of the toxins would paralyze the sphincter muscle of the iris.
Causing their pupils to widely dilate.
Exactly. A look that was considered highly alluring and seductive at the time. They were deliberately leveraging a neurotoxin to mimic the biological signs of physiological arousal.
Using literal poison as eye drops for beauty. Humans are wild.
Very true.
But the darker applications of deadly nightshade run deep through history, too. The wives of Roman emperors, Augustus and Claudius, were rumored to have used it to eliminate political rivals.
It was a very popular assassination tool.
It even makes an appearance in Shakespeare's Macbeth, where the Scottish army uses a nightshade-laced liquor to drug the invading Danish troops into a stupor before attacking.
Right.
So what makes this plant such a devastating biological weapon?
The danger lies in its specific tropane alkaloids, atropine and scopolamine. These compounds are muscarinic acetylcholine receptor antagonists.
Okay, so different from the nicotinic ones we talked about with hemlock.
Yes, this operates differently. Muscarinic receptors are the primary communication channels for your parasympathetic nervous system.
Let me break that down for the listener. The parasympathetic system is the rest and digest counterpart to your fight or flight sympathetic system. It regulates the unconscious automatic functions that keep you running smoothly. Like it produces saliva so you can swallow, it stimulates your sweat glands so you don't overheat, it constricts your pupils in bright light, and it keeps your heart rate at a calm baseline.
So when tropane alkaloids enter the bloodstream, they bind to those muscarinic receptors and completely block the acetylcholine from delivering its instructions.
Meaning the system just goes offline.
The parasympathetic system goes entirely offline. The body essentially loses its ability to regulate itself, resulting in a severe anticholinergic toxidrome.
And the medical symptoms are so distinct that emergency room doctors actually use a very specific, highly vivid mnemonic to diagnose it.
I love this mnemonic.
The rhyme goes, hot as a hare, blind as a bat, dry as a bone, red as a beet, and mad as a hatter.
It's perfect.
When you break down the biology behind each of those phrases, it paints a terrifying picture of the body malfunctioning. Let's start with dry as a bone and hot as a hare.
Right, so those occur because the blocked receptors can no longer signal the exocrine glands. Saliva production halts, making swallowing impossible.
And the sweating stops.
More critically, yes, the sweat glands shut down. Sweating is the human body's primary cooling mechanism. Without it, the body's internal temperature rapidly skyrockets, leading to dangerous hyperthermia.
You literally cook from the inside. And then blind as a bat happens because, just like those Venetian women, the pupils dilate to their maximum capacity and the ciliary muscles in the eyes just freeze.
The victim cannot focus on anything close up, and any bright light is blinding.
Then we have red as a beet.
That is the body's desperate, failing attempt to dump all that trapped internal heat by dilating the blood vessels near the surface of the skin, turning the victim deeply flushed.
But the final phase, mad as a hatter, is where the scopolamine exerts its most terrifying effect.
Because unlike conine, scopolamine crosses the blood-brain barrier with ease.
So it gets into the brain.
Oh, yeah. Once inside the central nervous system, it disrupts the cognitive pathways, inducing profound, waking delirium.
Meaning victims experience severe confusion, memory loss, and vivid, prolonged hallucinations.
They often engage in nonsensical gibberish speech or pick at imaginary bugs on their skin.
It's not just a poison, it's a sensory hijacking. The plant shuts down your internal cooling system, freezing you inside an overheating body, while simultaneously taking over the visual and cognitive centers of your brain and feeding you false realities.
It's essentially locking you inside your own overheating body while feeding you terrifying false realities.
That computer virus analogy is so spot on. It turns off the cooling fan and overrides the monitor. And the most insidious part of deadly nightshade is the lure.
The berries.
Yeah, the berries are a glossy, dark black, and unlike many toxic plants that taste terribly bitter, belladonna berries are actually surprisingly sweet.
And they look remarkably similar to wild blueberries or bilberries.
Which makes them an immense hazard to children foraging in the woods.
Absolutely. And this hallucinatory anticholinergic warfare is a hallmark of several Solanaceae species. You see the exact same chemical profile in the trumpet flowers.
Oh, like Datura.
Yes, plants like Datura, commonly known as jimsonweed, and Brugmansia, the angel's trumpet.
These are massive, incredibly beautiful ornamental plants. They have huge, pendulous, trumpet-shaped flowers that bloom in the evening and release this rich fragrance. You see them planted in suburban front yards all the time. Totally accessible.
But ingesting the seeds or brewing a tea from the leaves of Datura causes that exact same nightmarish delirium.
Yeah, the clinical toxicology reports we looked at described teenagers trying to use Jimson weed recreationally, expecting a standard psychedelic trip and ending up in the emergency room strapped to a bed.
They present with unquenchable thirst because their saliva production has stopped and hallucinations that can persist for 48 to 72 hours.
3 days.
They completely lose their tether to reality until the liver finally metabolizes the alkaloids.
Unbelievable. And we also have to mention mandrake, Mandragora officinarum, which is steeped in perhaps more folklore than any other plant in human history.
Oh, the folklore is rich with mandrake.
I mean, if you grew up reading Harry Potter, or if you've seen Pan's Labyrinth, you know the myth. The root of the mandrake often bifurcates as it grows downward, giving it the rough appearance of a pair of human legs or the little human body.
Right.
And the ancient superstition was that if you pulled a mandrake from the earth, the root would emit a scream so piercing it would instantly kill anyone who heard it.
So people would supposedly tie a dog to the plant, walk away, and call the dog to pull it out of the ground safely.
It's a great story, but what is the clinical reality of ingesting it?
The reality is deeply pharmacological. Mandrake contains a heavy concentration of those same tropane alkaloids, hyoscyamine, scopolamine, atropine.
Okay, so the same cocktail.
Yes, and the progression of mandrake poisoning is distinctly phasic. Initially, the alkaloids severely stimulate the central nervous system. The victim becomes hyperaroused, restless, and agitated.
Which transitions directly into the hallucinatory phase, bringing on that anticholinergic delirium.
But it doesn't end there. Eventually, the massive overstimulation exhausts the central nervous system, leading to profound depression and central paralysis.
So they crash.
Hard. The victim crashes into an unnaturally deep comatose sleep. If the dose is lethal, the breathing slows down, body temperature plummets, and they die quietly from respiratory failure in their sleep.
So the magic of the mandrake, its use in ancient flying ointments and witchcraft folklore, was entirely due to early humans stumbling upon a potent chemical receptor antagonist and interpreting the resulting physiological chaos as supernatural magic.
It was just profound chemical poisoning.
So we've covered the plants that shut off your lungs, overload your nervous system, and hijack your brain. Now we are moving to a group of incredibly common, beautiful, ornamental plants that target the absolute core of human survival, the heart.
The cardiac glycosides?
These aren't obscure weeds deep in the forest. These are plants sitting in millions of manicured gardens right now.
And from a biochemical standpoint, cardiac glycosides are highly specialized, precision-guided munitions.
Wow.
They don't waste time on the brain or the lungs. They target one specific microscopic mechanism, the sodium-potassium pump located in the cellular membrane of the myocardium, the heart muscle.
So to understand how a plant like foxglove, Digitalis purpurea, can stop a human heart, we have to look at what that pump is actually doing.
Right.
Every cell in your heart is essentially a tiny electrically charged battery. It maintains that charge by constantly bailing sodium ions out of the cell and pulling potassium ions in using the sodium-potassium pump.
Exactly. It's like a crew endlessly bailing water out of a boat so it can stay afloat and keep firing its electrical rhythm.
But when you ingest a cardiac glycoside from a foxglove leaf,
the toxin molecules physically bind to those pumps and jam them. The crew stops bailing.
oh man,
Sodium rapidly builds up inside the heart cell, and the cell attempts to compensate for this excess sodium by activating a different transport system, which ends up pulling a massive flood of calcium ions into the cell.
And calcium is the fundamental trigger for muscle contraction.
Precisely. The sudden spike in intracellular calcium makes the heart muscle contract with incredible violent force.
So it pumps too hard.
Yes. In an unregulated dose like eating a leaf or drinking a tea steeped from the flowers, this overwhelming calcium flood destroys the heart's electrical pacing.
It leads to lethal arrhythmias, meaning the heart beats in a chaotic, irregular pattern.
It also causes severe hyperkalemia, a dangerous buildup of potassium in the blood because the potassium can't get back into the cells. The heart beats itself into a state of total exhaustion and failure.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The massive paradox here is that foxglove is also a miracle of modern medicine.
It is the original botanical source of digitalis, or digoxin.
A life-saving pharmaceutical used by millions of patients suffering from congestive heart failure. Because a failing heart is weak, right? It struggles to pump blood efficiently.
Exactly.
So digoxin uses that exact same sodium-potassium pump blockade to increase the calcium just enough to help that weak heart pump a little stronger.
Yeah.
So how exactly do doctors walk that tightrope between a therapeutic dose and a toxic one? Is it just a matter of processing, or is the plant itself constantly fluctuating in its chemical makeup?
It's all about the therapeutic index, which is the margin of safety between a dose that heals and a dose that kills. For digoxin, that margin is razor thin.
Wow.
In a pharmaceutical setting, the active compound is extracted, purified, and dosed in micrograms, millionths of a gram, and the patient is monitored continuously to ensure their blood levels don't creep into toxicity.
But out in the wild, or in an amateur herbalist's kitchen, there's absolutely no quality control.
None. The amount of toxin in a living foxglove plant fluctuates wildly based on the time of day, the moisture in the soil, the amount of sunlight it received that week, and the age of the leaf.
That's terrifying.
You could brew a tea with a leaf on a Tuesday and feel nothing. You could brew a tea from the exact same plant on a Thursday and suffer a fatal cardiac event.
You're playing biological roulette with a chemical that fundamentally alters your heart's rhythm.
And we frequently see accidental poisonings because the broad, soft green leaves of the foxglove before it flowers look incredibly similar to comfrey.
Oh, right. Comfrey is widely used in traditional herbal medicine to make teas.
Yes. People go out to harvest comfrey, pick foxglove by mistake, and steep a cardiac toxin into their morning beverage.
And when someone accidentally poisons themselves with foxglove, the symptoms aren't just a sudden heart attack. The clinical reports detail a fascinating, specific side effect.
The visual changes.
Yeah, alongside severe nausea, vomiting, and a fluttering, irregular pulse, patients suffering from digitalis toxicity frequently experience profound visual disturbances. They develop a condition called xanthopsia.
Where their color perception skews entirely yellow.
Yeah, they report seeing the world through a yellow tint, or seeing bright yellow halos radiating around light sources.
Which brings a fascinating historical theory to light. Many art historians and medical professionals have speculated that the painter Vincent van Gogh...
Wait, Van Gogh?
Yes. During his later years in Arles, when he painted his famous sunflowers and the starry night, he may have been suffering from digitalis toxicity.
Because of the yellow.
Yes. He was being treated by his doctor with foxglove extract for his epilepsy and manic depression. The overwhelming yellows and the prominent halos around the stars in his later paintings align perfectly with the clinical symptoms of xanthopsia.
It's incredible to think that a chemical defense mechanism evolved by a plant to deter insects might have fundamentally altered the color palette of one of the world's most famous artists.
It really makes you look at his art differently.
Definitely. But foxglove isn't the only cardiac assassin hiding in plain sight. We have to discuss oleander. Nerium oleander.
A very common one.
This is a ubiquitous, drought-resistant shrub with long, dark green leaves and beautiful clusters of pink, white, or red flowers. You see it planted in the medians of highways across warm climates and landscaping public parks everywhere.
Oleander is arguably one of the most toxic, widely cultivated ornamental plants in existence.
And every single cellular component of the plant, the roots, the woody stems, the leaves, the flower petals, even the nectar inside the flowers, contains potent cardiac glycosides, primarily oleandrin.
And the resilience of this toxin is astounding. It does not break down easily when dried or heated.
The clinical case studies on oleander are just mind-blowing because the exposure routes are so deeply unintentional. The forces highlight cases where people have died or suffered severe cardiac failure simply from eating honey produced by bees that heavily visited oleander flowers.
Yes, the nectar itself is toxic.
There are documented cases of campers cutting a seemingly dead, dry oleander twig, sharpening it, and using it to skewer a hot dog or a marshmallow over a fire.
And the heat drives the oleandrin directly into the meat.
Eating it causes massive cardiac arrhythmias. Even throwing the brush into a bonfire is incredibly dangerous. The smoke acts as a particulate carrier for the glycosides, and inhaling it can cause systemic poisoning.
It demands absolute, unwavering respect.
A similar caution applies to lily of the valley, Convallaria majalis, right?
Yes. These are those delicate, incredibly fragrant white bell-shaped flowers that bloom in the spring, frequently used in wedding bouquets.
They, too, are packed with a suite of over 30 different cardiac glycosides, primarily convalitoxin.
The major danger with lily of the valley happens early in the spring, before the flowers bloom.
The look-alike phase.
Right. The plant pushes up these broad, smooth, green leaves that look almost identical to wild garlic or ramps.
And there is a massive culinary craze right now for foraging wild ramps. People head into the woods, see a patch of broad green leaves, harvest them in bulk, and make pesto.
But if they've grabbed lily of the valley instead, that pesto becomes a cardiac hazard.
This is where the sensory test is your only fail-safe. If it looks like garlic, but you crush a leaf and there is absolutely no pungent onion or garlic smell, you drop it immediately and wash your hands.
Exactly. Rely on your nose.
We've explored the heart stoppers and the brain hackers. Now let's look at a chemical mechanism that effectively does both, utilizing a toxin so potent it has been employed as a weapon of war and murder for centuries. Let's talk about aconite.
Widely known as monkshood or wolfsbane, from the genus Aconitum.
This is the one from our intro murder story. It's a stunning, tall, perennial plant native to the mountainous regions of the Northern Hemisphere. It produces these deeply vibrant, hooded blue or purple flowers.
The shape of the upper sepal literally arcs over the rest of the flower like the cowl of a medieval monk's habit, which gives it the name monkshood.
And the alternative name, wolfsbane, stems from its historical use in Europe, where shepherds would allegedly lace chunks of raw meat with the root juice to kill wolves threatening their flocks, and in folklore to repel werewolves.
Even the indigenous Hunangax people of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska used a local species of aconite to tip their whaling harpoons.
Whaling harpoons, like for whales.
Yes, they would strike a massive whale, and the toxin was potent enough to eventually paralyze the animal so it would drown and wash ashore.
That is absurd. The active compound here is aconitine, a highly complex alkaloid. While foxglove attacks the sodium-potassium pump, aconitine targets a different gateway: the voltage-gated sodium channels in the cell membranes of excitable tissues, primarily the nerves and the heart muscle.
Right. And to understand how that works, let's break down a voltage-gated channel. Normally, these channels are like heavily sprung doors. They pop open for just a fraction of a millisecond to let sodium rush into the nerve cell.
Which creates the electrical spark that fires a pain signal or tells the heart to beat.
Yes, and then they instantly snap shut, allowing the cell to reset.
But aconitine functions like a microscopic wedge.
It does. It binds to the sodium channel and jams the door permanently open. The cell cannot reset.
So the nerve is locked in a state of continuous, overwhelming depolarization. The electrical signal just floods the system in a chaotic, unending loop.
And the physical sensation of this occurring in real time is terrifying.
I can imagine.
The moment the plant touches the mucous membranes of the mouth, the jammed sensory nerves trigger a profound, burning, tingling sensation that rapidly progresses to complete numbness.
This paresthesia spreads from the lips and tongue down the throat, into the fingers, and across the entire body. It feels like your skin is buzzing with electricity.
As the toxin reaches the heart, those permanently open sodium channels utterly destroy the cardiac pacing.
The heart rate plummets into severe bradycardia, beating impossibly slow before descending into ventricular fibrillation, where the heart muscle just quivers erratically, completely failing to pump blood to the brain.
And similar to the yellow vision of foxglove, aconitine toxicity also messes with the visual cortex. Victims often report defective color vision where the world is tinted deeply purple.
The clinical toxicology reports we reviewed are packed with real-world case studies that show exactly how easily this plant claims lives.
Like the older couple in the garden.
Yeah, in one case, an 81-year-old couple was out in their private garden. They picked some leaves they genuinely believed were ground elder, a common edible weed, and tossed them into a lunch salad.
Within 30 minutes of finishing the meal, they both experienced severe burning in their mouths and fingers, followed by violent vomiting.
And before the ambulance even arrived, the husband went into full cardiac arrest on his living room floor.
Paramedics miraculously managed to resuscitate him through intense cardiovascular intervention, but his wife's heart rate spiked to 200 beats per minute, oscillating wildly.
They both required days in the ICU, all from eating a few misidentified leaves grown in their own backyard.
It's tragic.
And then there is the tragic case of a 25-year-old, perfectly healthy Canadian hiker exploring an island off the coast of Newfoundland.
Oh, this one is rough.
It's a late summer afternoon. He's forging along the trail, eating wild blackberries. He notices some pretty purple wildflowers growing right next to the bushes, and decides to eat a few of those as well.
Just a completely innocent mistake.
He ingested them around 2:30 in the afternoon. By 5:00 p.m., he is doubled over in severe abdominal pain, violently ill. By 6:15 p.m., he collapses on the trail and dies of aconitine-induced ventricular fibrillation.
Under 4 hours from a pleasant, healthy hike to death because he assumed that a flower growing next to a safe berry must also be safe.
You hear these stories, and you have to wonder why on earth are herbalists or foragers messing with a plant that has a very low margin of safety? Does boiling or processing it actually make it safe? Or is that just playing Russian roulette with a salad?
Well, traditional Chinese medicine has utilized aconite root, known as fuzi, for centuries to treat ailments like rheumatism and chronic pain.
Right.
However, they employ an intense, prolonged processing method, boiling or steaming the roots for hours upon hours. This heat treatment hydrolyzes the highly toxic aconitine alkaloids into significantly less toxic derivatives like aconine.
But the margin of error is basically zero. We read a case study involving a 21-year-old man who was reading up on herbal remedies and decided to manufacture his own anxiety medication.
Right, he bought raw aconite root?
He ground it into a powder himself and packed it into gelatin capsules. He started taking one a day. One night, feeling particularly anxious and wanting to increase the therapeutic effect, he swallowed 3 capsules at once.
Which is a massive overdose.
He woke up 5 hours later, completely numb from head to toe, seeing the room tinted in purple, and his heart rate had crashed to 43 beats per minute.
He survived, but only after spending 48 agonizing days in the hospital fighting systemic organ shock.
So even with professional preparation, the line is incredibly thin.
Pharmacological data from regions where aconite is heavily utilized, such as Hong Kong, shows that processed aconite remains a leading cause of severe herbal poisonings.
Wow.
The raw plant is essentially a loaded biological weapon. Attempting to process it in a home kitchen is the definition of reckless endangerment.
Absolutely. We've talked extensively about toxins that attack major systems, the nervous system, the respiratory muscles, the heart. Let's delve into the microscopic world. We are looking at cellular saboteurs.
The tocylbumins.
These are phytotoxins that don't care about your nerves or your heartbeat. They attack the very fundamental building blocks of life at the cellular level.
Toxybumins represent the pinnacle of botanical chemical warfare. They are classified scientifically as type 2 ribosome inactivating proteins.
The 2 most infamous examples are ricin, extracted from the seeds of the castor bean plant, and abrin, found in the seeds of the rosary pea.
Now, ricin has permeated pop culture.
Oh yeah, it's the ultimate covert assassination weapon in spy novels, and famously used by Walter White in Breaking Bad. But the actual molecular biology of how ricin kills a human cell is far more terrifying than the fiction.
It really is. A toxylbumin is a massive, complex protein made of 2 distinct parts, an A chain and a B chain. They are linked together by a single disulfide bond.
To understand the invasion, you must look at the surface of a human cell. The B chain acts as the master key.
Yes, it binds specifically to galactose sugars protruding from the cell membrane. This binding tricks the cell into initiating endocytosis.
The cell membrane actually folds inward, engulfing the ricin molecule and pulling it inside, believing it to be a useful nutrient.
Once inside, the toxin hijacks the cell's internal transport highway. It moves backward through the Golgi apparatus, the cell's shipping center, and travels deep into the endoplasmic reticulum.
And it is here, deep behind enemy lines, that the cellular environment breaks that connecting disulfide bond. The B chain has done its job. The A chain is unleashed into the cytosol, the fluid interior of the cell.
And the A chain is an enzymatic wrecking ball. Its sole evolutionary purpose is to hunt down and destroy ribosomes.
And ribosomes are the biological 3D printers of your cells. They read genetic RNA instructions and manufacture the vital proteins that keep the cell functioning, repairing itself, and living.
Right. The ricin A chain approaches a ribosome, chemically cleaves a single specific adenine base from the ribosomal RNA, and fundamentally permanently breaks the machine.
I always visualize this as an intricate industrial heist.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, so the B chain is the saboteur disguised as a delivery driver. He bluffs his way past security at the factory gates. Once he's inside the warehouse, he opens a crate and lets out the A chain.
And the A chain is just out for destruction.
The A chain is a maniac with a sledgehammer. He runs onto the factory floor, changes the locks on the door so nobody can stop him, and systematically smashes the control panel of every single assembly line machine.
So the factory can no longer produce anything.
Exactly. The workers starve, the lights go out, and the factory dies. The clinical data suggests that a single molecule of the ricin A chain, once loose in the cytosol, can destroy up to 1,500 ribosomes every single minute until the cell undergoes apoptosis and collapses.
It is cellular mass extinction. If the castor beans are chewed and swallowed, releasing the ricin into the gastrointestinal tract, it causes catastrophic necrosis of the gut lining, severe hemorrhagic diarrhea, and inevitable multi-organ failure as the toxin enters the bloodstream.
And castor bean plants, Ricinus communis, are stunningly beautiful, with massive star-shaped reddish-green leaves and spiky red seed pods. They're incredibly common ornamental plants in warm climates.
But the seeds themselves have a very hard, mottled outer shell. If a child swallowed a seed whole, it might actually pass through the digestive tract unbroken and harmless.
But the moment the seed is chewed, the ricin is released.
Exactly. And the rosary pea, Abrus precatorius, contains a brin, which functions on the exact same A chain, B chain mechanism, but is estimated to be up to 75 times more potent than ricin.
75 times?
Yes. The seeds of the rosary pea are visually captivating. They are a brilliant, glossy, candy apple red with a stark jet black spot at one end.
Because of this striking appearance in their hard shell, they are frequently strung together to make traditional jewelry, bracelets, and Catholic rosaries in tropical regions, hence the name.
But simply chewing and swallowing one single seed is enough to deliver a fatal dose of abrin to a human adult.
And the chilling reality is that modern medicine has no known antidote for either ricin or abrin poisoning. You can only provide supportive care and hope the patient's body can withstand the cellular destruction.
But the chemical aggression of plants isn't limited to things you have to ingest. Some plants deploy weapons of mass destruction the moment you brush against their leaves.
Right, the contact hazards.
Yeah.
And they operate on mechanisms that seem almost vindictive. Let's start with giant hogweed, Heracleum mantagasianum.
Giant hogweed looks like a plant out of the Jurassic period. It's an invasive species in North America and Europe that can grow over 15 feet tall, with deeply lobed, jagged leaves that span 5 feet across, and massive umbrella-like clusters of white flowers at the top.
The thick, hollow stem is pale green, heavily speckled with dark purple spots and covered in stiff, bristly white hairs.
The danger of giant hogweed lies in its clear, watery sap, which is heavily laced with compounds called furanocoumarins. The sap is profoundly phototoxic.
Phototoxic is a crucial distinction because if you get the sap on your skin in a completely dark room, it will cause no immediate irritation. It is not an acid. It doesn't burn on contact.
Right. Instead, the furanocoumarins rapidly absorb deep into the lipid layers of your skin cells, infiltrating the nucleus and nestling right in amongst your DNA strands.
They lay a trap inside your cells, and the trigger for that trap is ultraviolet light.
Exactly. The moment you walk out of the shade and sunlight hits the exposed skin, the UV radiation activates the chemical. The furanocoumarins violently bind to the DNA, causing catastrophic structural damage to the epidermal cells.
The plant literally weaponizes the sun against your flesh.
The resulting reaction is called phytophotodermatitis. It causes agonizing, deep chemical burns, massive fluid-filled blisters that can take months to heal, and severe hyperpigmentation, dark, purplish-black scarring that can remain highly sensitive to sunlight for years or even permanently.
If a landscaper hits a giant hogweed stalk with a string trimmer and the sap aerosolizes into their eyes, the UV reaction on the cornea can cause permanent blindness.
It's horrific.
Yet, incredibly, Australia hosts a plant that makes giant hogweed look like a minor inconvenience, the gimpy.
Dendrocnide moroides. It belongs to the nettle family, but calling it a stinging nettle is a massive understatement.
Yeah, it is an unassuming shrub with broad, heart-shaped leaves native to the rainforests of Queensland. Locals refer to it as the suicide plant.
The pain inflicted by brushing against the gimpy leaf is legendary. Victims and researchers have described the sensation as feeling like you are simultaneously being electrocuted and having burning acid poured over your skin.
How does a simple leaf inflict neurological trauma on that scale?
The entire plant, leaves, stems, and fruit is densely covered in microscopic hollow trichomes made of silica. They are essentially millions of tiny, fragile glass hypodermic needles.
Oh, God.
The moment you brush the leaf, these silica needles effortlessly penetrate the skin. The tips snap off, releasing a highly stable, complex neurotoxin called moroidin directly into the surrounding tissue.
And moroidin binds directly to the pain receptors in the nervous system, forcing them into a state of maximum unyielding activation.
And because the needles are made of pure silica glass, the human body's immune system cannot break them down or dissolve them. They remain physically lodged deep in the dermis.
This means the excruciating pain doesn't just last for a few hours. The area remains hypersensitized for months, sometimes up to a year.
Yes. Something as simple as taking a hot shower, a cold breeze blowing across the skin, or just pressing a finger against the area will mechanically disturb those embedded glass needles and re-trigger the intense burning electrical agony all over again.
The field-expedient treatment procedure for a gimpy sting is almost medieval. Because the hairs are physical glass shards, washing them with water does nothing.
Right.
You have to carefully pour a diluted solution of hydrochloric acid over the affected skin to neutralize the pain-causing peptides, and then apply medical hair removal wax strips over the burns, let them harden, and physically rip the millions of microscopic glass needles out of your flesh.
It is not a fun process.
I think I'll just stay out of the Australian rainforest entirely. And we can't ignore the Western Hemisphere's contribution to contact horrors. The manchineel tree, found in the coastal regions of Florida, the Caribbean, and Central America.
When the Spanish conquistadors encountered it, they named it Manzanilla de la Muerte, the little apple of death.
It holds the Guinness World Record as the most dangerous tree in the world. Every single part of the tree is packed with a cocktail of powerful toxins, primarily forbol esters, which are incredibly caustic skin irritants. The sap is thick, milky white, and highly corrosive.
The survival guides for the Caribbean specifically warn tourists never to seek shelter under a manchineel tree during a tropical rainstorm.
Right, because the rainwater washing over the leaves is enough to dissolve the forbol esters and carry them down. If that toxic rain drips onto your skin, it causes immediate severe contact dermatitis, burning, and blistering.
And the fruit itself looks exactly like a small, sweet green crabapple. If you take a bite, it initially tastes sweet, but within minutes, a burning sensation cascades down your throat.
The tissues swell and blister so severely that the airway can swell completely shut, causing death by asphyxiation.
As we transition toward looking at how to protect ourselves, it is worth briefly recognizing how these microscopic botanical chemicals have quietly orchestrated mass hysteria and tragedy throughout human history without anyone realizing the true culprit.
We see this vividly with ergot, Claviceps purpurea. Ergot isn't a plant, it's a parasitic fungus that infects cereal grasses, most notably rye.
During the damp, cold, wet periods of the Middle Ages in Europe, this fungus thrived. Peasants would harvest the infected rye, mill the grains fungus all into flour, and bake it into bread.
Eating that contaminated bread caused a horrific disease called ergotism, historically known as St. Anthony's fire. Ergot contains a potent mix of alkaloids.
Some of these alkaloids cause profound vasoconstriction. They clamp down the blood vessels in the extremities so tightly that blood flow stops, causing a severe burning sensation in the arms and legs that eventually leads to gangrene and auto-amputation of limbs.
But the other alkaloids in ergot are closely related to lysergic acid. They are literal chemical precursors to the psychedelic drug LSD.
Exactly. When an entire village relied on a contaminated crop of rye, you would see mass poisonings. The vasoconstriction caused physical agony, while the psychoactive alkaloids induced severe paranoia, collective visual hallucinations, and a terrifying neurological condition called dancing mania,
where victims would experience violent, involuntary muscle spasms and convulsions in the streets until they collapsed from exhaustion.
And modern historians, epidemiologists, and toxicologists have compiled compelling evidence that ergot poisoning was the underlying biological cause of the Salem witch trials in 1691.
Right. Because the winter had been brutal, the spring was wet and damp, perfect conditions for the fungus in the rye fields of Massachusetts.
The young girls who initiated the panic reported feeling a sensation of invisible pins and needles pricking their skin. They suffered violent physical contortions, and they hallucinated spectral visions of townspeople attacking them.
These are textbook symptoms of ergotism. A microscopic fungus growing on a piece of bread caused a mass delusion that resulted in 19 innocent people being hanged for witchcraft.
It perfectly illustrates the terrifying power of these compounds when they interact with a society that lacks the scientific framework to understand them.
We see a similar, deeply tragic historical footprint in North America with a plant called white snake root, Ageratina altissima.
Yes.
This is the plant responsible for the death of Abraham Lincoln's mother, Nancy Hanks, when he was just 9 years old. She died of a mysterious pioneer illness they called milk sickness. And the mechanics of this poisoning are incredibly insidious because the humans weren't eating the plant.
No, they weren't. White snake root contains a highly toxic alcohol known as tremetone. If a human were to eat the leaves directly, they would suffer severe tremors, vomiting, and potential heart failure.
But European settlers weren't foraging for it. Instead, they let their dairy cattle roam free in the woodland pastures. The cattle would graze on the white snake root.
The cows would absorb the trimtone, which then heavily concentrated in their fat, their meat, and critically, their milk.
The pioneer families would drink the milk from their own cows and ingest a concentrated, lethal dose of trimentone, never once suspecting that the cow was acting as a biological processing plant for a forest weed.
It wiped out entire settlements in the Midwest. The medical establishment was completely baffled for decades.
It wasn't until a frontier female physician named Dr. Anna Bixby befriended an elderly Shawnee medicine woman who led her into the woods and pointed directly to the white snake root that the mystery of milk sickness was finally solved.
Nature is infinitely more complex and interwoven than we often give it credit for. Which brings us to the most practical aspect of our deep dive today.
Yes, let's get into it.
We have thoroughly explored the horrors of what is out there. The goal is not to instill a paralyzing fear of the forest. The goal is empowerment through botanical forensics. How do you, the listener, walk through the woods or pull weeds in your garden without becoming a case study?
Let's lay out the learner's practical survival guide. First and foremost, we need a checklist of visual red flags. What are the immediate signs that a plant is armed and dangerous?
The first thing to observe is the sap. If you accidentally break a leaf or snap a stem, look closely at what oozes out. If the sap is milky white, thick, or oddly colored, that is a massive immediate warning sign.
So steer clear of milky sap.
Yes. The spurge family, which includes many toxic ornamentals, is notorious for highly irritating milky sap. Harmless, edible plants generally have clear, watery sap.
Second is leaf arrangement and structure. We all know the classic childhood rhyme. Leaves of three, let it be. This is your baseline defense against the toxicodendron genus, poison ivy and poison oak.
But looking deeper, check the stem shape and how the leaves attach. If a plant has a square-shaped stem and the leaves grow opposite each other in neat pairs, it's highly likely to be in the mint family, which is generally quite safe and aromatic.
But if the stem is perfectly round, totally smooth, hairless, and covered in purple splotches, you are looking at the fatal poison hemlock.
You also need to look at the reproductive structures, berries, and flowers. Berries that are stark white, pale yellow, or an unnatural glossy black are statistically high risk for toxicity.
And it is vital to remember that birds and deer possess completely different digestive enzymes and liver metabolisms than humans.
A bird can happily gorge on berries that would put a human in a coma. Never ever assume a berry is safe for human consumption just because you see an animal eating it.
And regarding flowers, the shape of the cluster is a huge giveaway. Be extremely wary of umbels. An umbel is a flat-topped or slightly domed, umbrella-shaped cluster of tiny white or yellow flowers. All the little flower stalks radiate out from a single point, like the ribs of an umbrella.
If you see an umbel, your diagnostic suspicion should immediately jump to maximum alert. That umbel structure signifies the Apiaceae family. You are staring at the family that houses both the harmless wild carrot and the violently lethal water hemlock.
Unless you have the forensic expertise to check if the leaf veins terminate in a notch or a tip, you walk away. Beyond just looking at the plant, there's a level of ecological awareness required. Toxic plants don't just grow randomly everywhere. They have preferred habitats.
Many of the most aggressive and dangerous species, like poison hemlock, Jimson weed, and giant hogweed, are highly opportunistic colonizers. They thrive in what botanists call disturbed soils.
Meaning what?
They love areas where the earth has been recently churned up: construction sites, roadside ditches, abandoned lots, and riverbanks that have been heavily scoured by spring floods. They also dominate transition zones, the specific edge habitats where a deep forest meets an open meadow, or right along the brushed edges of a popular hiking trail.
The timing of your hike matters deeply, too. The toxicological data shows that late spring and the peak heat of summer are the highest risk periods.
The plants are in their most aggressive phase of active growth. Their stems are tender, they are pushing out new leaves, and their vascular systems are absolutely pumped full of the saps, oils, and alkaloids that cause chemical burns and systemic poisoning.
That midsummer window is when a casual brush against a poison ivy vine is most likely to easily rupture the fragile plant cells, smearing a heavy dose of urushiol oil directly onto your bare calves.
It happens so easily.
So let's talk about first aid and protocols. Assume the worst happens. I'm out hiking, I trip off the trail, and I land barehanded in a patch of something suspect. My skin is covered in snap or oil. What do I do? And critically, what do I absolutely avoid doing?
For dermal contact with an irritant like the urushiol oil from poison ivy or poison oak, your immediate absolute priority is mechanical removal of the oil from your skin.
Get it off fast.
Yes, urushiol acts like axle grease. If you just splash water on it, the oil repels the water and stays on your skin. You need friction and a surfactant. Wash the area vigorously with cool water and a strong soap. Liquid dish soap is phenomenal for this because it is chemically designed to cut through heavy grease.
I've also read that rubbing alcohol or specialized alcohol wipes can rapidly dissolve the oils if you don't have running water nearby. But the decontamination doesn't stop with your skin, does it?
No, it extends to your gear and your pets. Urushiol oil is chemically incredibly stubborn. It does not evaporate. It can persist, fully active on the laces of your hiking boots, the fabric of your pants, or the fur of your dog for months or even years.
Wow.
You can go hiking in July, throw your jacket in the closet, pull it out in December, touch the sleeve, and contract a massive poison ivy rash in the dead of winter. Everything must be washed in hot, soapy water.
That is relentless.
Oh.
What is the protocol for ingestion? Let's say a child is in the backyard, finds a shiny black belladonna berry, and eats it before the parent can stop them.
The absolute golden rule of toxic ingestion is, do not induce vomiting unless you are specifically and explicitly instructed to do so by a certified poison control center or an emergency medical physician.
Why? I mean, it seems counterintuitive. If the poison is in the stomach, shouldn't you get it out?
Because the physical act of violent vomiting can cause massive secondary trauma. If the plant is caustic, bringing it back up the esophagus will cause a second round of severe chemical burns to the throat and mouth.
Oh, that makes sense.
Vomiting also carries a high risk of aspiration, inhaling the toxic stomach contents directly into the lungs, causing lethal chemical pneumonia. Furthermore, the vagus nerve stimulation from vomiting can severely exacerbate cardiovascular stress if the patient has ingested a cardiac glycoside.
So what should you do instead?
Immediately clear any remaining plant matter from the mouth. Gather a comprehensive physical sample of the plant, cut a branch with the leaves, the stem, and the berries attached. Place it in a bag.
Because the doctors need to know what they're dealing with.
The emergency room doctors need to see the botanical architecture to know exactly which toxidrome they're fighting and get to an ER immediately.
There is one more crucial safety rule highlighted across all the foraging guides. Never burn unknown or toxic plants. It seems like a good way to destroy a patch of poison ivy or clear oleander brush, but it is incredibly dangerous.
It is arguably the most dangerous thing you can do. When you throw a toxic plant onto a fire, the intense heat doesn't always destroy the chemical compounds. Instead, it vaporizes them.
The oils and alkaloids ride the smoke particles into the air.
If you are standing near that bonfire and inhale the smoke, you are drawing vaporized urushiol or oleandrin directly into the delicate alveoli of your lungs. It causes massive, systemic internal chemical burns, severe pulmonary edema, and can easily be fatal.
Before we wrap up, I want to address a massive piece of foraging lore. If I'm out in the woods and I find a plant I don't recognize, but I want to know if it's edible, I've heard about the 15-minute skin test.
Oh, boy.
The idea is that you crush a leaf, rub the juices on the sensitive skin of your inner wrist, wait 15 minutes, and if your skin doesn't turn red or itch, the plant is safe to eat. Is there any biological validity to that test, or should we treat every unknown leaf like a biohazard?
The 15-minute skin test is not just flawed, it is a lethally dangerous myth.
Really?
The test only checks for localized contact dermatitis, things like acid or urushiol. But many of the most devastating systemic phytotoxins, the SICU toxin in water hemlock, the amatoxins in deadcat mushrooms, the cardiac glycosides in foxglove do absolutely nothing to the surface of the skin.
So it's completely pointless.
They are not topical irritants. They only become active once they are absorbed through the mucosal lining of the gastrointestinal tract and enter the bloodstream to be processed by the liver, the brain, or the heart.
That is wild.
The leaf could perfectly pass a skin test, you eat it, and you die of ventricular fibrillation 3 hours later. Unless you can positively identify a plant with 100% certainty using multiple cross-referenced botanical markers, you treat it as a biohazard.
So absolutely no rubbing random leaves on your wrists and hoping for the best?
None.
Well, we have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today. We journeyed from the damp prison cell in ancient Athens, watching the creeping respiratory shutdown of poison hemlock claimed Socrates, to the violent, unchecked neurological storms unleashed by water hemlock.
It's quite a spectrum.
We examine the sweet, hallucinogenic lure of deadly nightshade hacking the body's internal cooling systems and unpack the razor-thin margin between the life-saving medicine and the lethal cardiac arrest induced by foxglove.
Not to mention the toxalbumins.
Right, we ventured into the microscopic realm to watch the toxalbumins in castor beans systematically dismantle the protein factories of our cells. And we unraveled the incredible forensic science required to catch a murderer using aconitine 5 years after the crime. We even looked at how a microscopic fungus on rye bread might have fueled the mass hysteria of the Salem witch trials.
It's all incredibly interconnected.
We rely on the plant kingdom for absolutely everything that sustains us. They provide our caloric intake, they serve as the foundation for our most vital pharmaceuticals, and they generate the very oxygen we pull into our lungs. But this deep dive serves as a profound, sobering reminder to respect the wild. Nature is not a passive, benevolent petting zoo. It is a highly evolved, deeply competitive ecosystem engaged in a perpetual arms race.
It certainly is.
Your best tools for enjoying the outdoors safely aren't luck or intuition. They are knowledge, patience, and keen observation. Taking the extra 5 seconds to check if a stem is smooth or hairy, noticing if a tiny leaf vein ends at a notch or a tip, paying attention to the color of the sap. These microscopic details are the literal difference between a beautiful afternoon hike and a catastrophic medical emergency.
It fundamentally reframes how you look at the natural world around you. We spend so much time as a species marveling at human technology, at our ability to engineer pharmaceuticals and design modern weapons. But the plant kingdom perfected biological and chemical warfare millions of years before we even existed.
So true.
And they did it silently, relentlessly, using nothing but water, soil, and sunlight. Next time you look out over a beautiful, serene garden or walk down a quiet forest trail, take a moment to ask yourself, what silent, microscopic battles are being fought right under your feet, and what lethal chemical secrets are those gentle green leaves still hiding from us?
That quiet meadow is a battlefield. I know I will never look at a wild carrot, a beautiful trumpet flower, or a patch of wild garlic the same way again. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the beautiful, highly deceptive, and deadly world of botanical forensics. Stay curious, stay intensely observant, and please watch where you step.